Hi, welcome again to this time of reflection. We are reflecting on the 19th week of Ordinary Time. Today is Wednesday, um, and we are studying and reflecting on the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, on how to mature through community life. This week, we are invited also to ask three questions. What, in essence, is Christian community? Why do we need to participate in Christian community, and the house as well that community life teaches us about Christian relationships. So yesterday we were already going through about the what and a little bit of the why. We were saying that Christian community, or the essentials of Christian community, is about welcoming the little ones, learning how to welcome those who are not physically little, but who are perhaps little in our own eyes, that we consider less valuable in our own lives, people we tend to neglect or even forget. So, Christian community is about welcoming these little ones and growing in a more expansive love, if you like, a heart that makes us grow to include an inclusive love for more people, and that is the source or the essence of Christian community. And we were saying that one of these basic attitudes behind that is humility. We need to be humble, of course, in order to be welcoming. And one of the greatest expressions of that humility is constant change. Change in what we think about others, change perhaps more so in the way we think about other people and our relationships. So Jesus said yesterday, in the chapter 18, the first few verses, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of God. You will never be able to value what Christian community is all about if we don't participate in a constant change, a constant examination of the way we think about others and the way we think about our relationships. So that's the essence, and the why of participating in community is to learn how to live in relationships, Christian relationships. So participating in Christian community is not just to look for refuge, it's not an escape from the world and the challenges of life, but it's basically learning how to live those challenges. That's why we participate in Christian community. So if we see imperfections, we see challenges, it's a chance to learn, and to learn to grow ourselves, not to mature as Christians in our relationships in the world, in daily life. Now today we're going to deepen a little bit on the house. How can we grow in maturity in through Christian community? And Jesus gives us very practical advice in this Gospel of Matthew. And I'll just read the passage. It's from Matthew 18. I invite you, as usual, to read it first, by yourself before you continue listening to this video. Matthew 18, verses 15 to 20. 5 verses. Just read them and ponder reflectively. I'll just read it out as well. It's a very common passage. Jesus says, "If your brother does something wrong, go and have it out with him alone, between your two selves. If he listens to you, you have won back your brother. If he does not listen, take one or two others along with you. Whatever the misdemeanor, the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses is required to sustain the charge. But if he refuses to listen to these, report it to the community. And if he refuses to listen to the community, treat him like a Gentile or a tax collector. In truth, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And he continues, "In truth, I tell you once again, if 2 of you on earth agree to ask anything at all, it will be granted to you by my Father in heaven. For where two or three meet in my name, I am there among them. So there are various things we can say about this passage. No, the different steps of how to make fraternal corrections, um, or about prayer in common, and whenever we gather in community, God is there. But there are three words I'd like to emphasize in order to grow in the way that we relate as Christians, know how to grow in relationships. Argument, listening, and agreement. Okay, three steps here that we can see in this passage of today. To learn how to argue, and one of the key elements of learning how to argue is listening. And when we learn to listen and argue, that is where we get real agreement, real reconciliation, and real growth in relationship, of love, of intimacy, of friendship even. So Christian maturity, once again, Christian maturity is about learning how to argue in a Christian way. And one of the essential elements is listening, learning how to listen, and reaching agreement. So reaching agreement is the goal, if you like, of Christian communication. But it goes through arguing or reasoning out, if you like, and listening. Something that helps me to consider about Christian life or Christian communication is to realize that Jesus was the first great communicator. He didn't just communicate things. We're very used to communicate information. Jesus communicated himself. He made himself known. And he must have been a very good communicator and one who knew how to argue and to listen. Why? Because look at the number of followers he has today. Maybe we can learn from him how to argue and to reason as Christians. Not just to convince people that we are right, but to reach true agreement and relationship. Let me just go through these three, or perhaps just arguing and listening, okay? But I'll start with listening. We know that in communication, listening is very important. And somebody once said something that I really like about listening, is that if you really listen to someone, you will change. If you really listen out of love to somebody, that love or loving listening changes you. We all listen. We're used to attending classes. We're used to listening to articles on YouTube or opinions. But it doesn't mean that we change. I can listen to you, but it doesn't mean I change. But if I really listen deeply to someone, communicating themselves, and if I really love that person, that communication will change me. Now maybe at this point you might think, how I wish others would listen to me and change because they heard what I'm expressing of myself. But of course, Christianity is a lot about being the first one. I really like this version here about arguing, because Jesus says, if your brother sins or your sister sins, have it out with them. In the New Jerusalem Bible, it doesn't say correct them, because sometimes when we say correct them, it sounds like I'm the one who knows better and the other doesn't know. And so I have the superior hand to correct them. Whereas in this version, it says, have it out with them, argue with them, reason it out with them. And reasoning out means listening, both ways. It's not just I correct you, so you have to listen. No. If I find something that I don't agree with you, then I argue it out with you, I have it out with you, I reason the issue out with you, and we both have to listen. Learning how to argue is really something so Christian. And it really amazes me in many of our contexts nowadays, the number of years that we study uh, and we learn, but we don't know how to argue. We're so good at convincing people about in our workplace, but in the most intimate and closer relationships, we might not know how to argue things out, to reason things out. Most of the time in relationships, I would say, we are asserting ourselves, but we don't know how to give reasons for who we are or what we believe. And this is something essential in arguing. And just on the tone of listening in argument, I would say, or I would repeat something that I heard before, which really helps me to understand what finding arguments or giving reasons is about. This person says, we never truly understand ourselves until we understand how someone else could think differently from me. So we don't really understand what we assert of ourselves unless we learn how to accept that somebody else might think differently from what I'm thinking. This sounds very simple, but in the practice, it's difficult. That we tend to want to assert. We are not really, if you think about it, um, we're not really thinking when we assert ourselves. We are just asserting what we feel about something. We haven't really reasoned it out why we think in a certain way and why we feel something about an issue. Um, for example, if we think about family life, when we think about our finances, why we assert a certain way about spending money, about budgeting, about expenses, in terms of relationships, perhaps with our family, children, spouses, in laws, we might find a certain way of relating, and we feel strongly about it, but we don't know how to give reasons. Different levels, no, even in friendships, about what we feel about life. So, what I'm trying to say here is many times we are not really thinking. We haven't learned how to argue things out. We've learned to accept information and to assert that information without learning how to think it through. So, real argument, Christian argument, is about giving reasons to reason things out for ourselves with God and also with others. And this is the beauty about Jesus. Why did Jesus come? Because God could impose and assert him. Well, imagine if God asserts himself upon us, that could be very scary. Jesus came to show a God who wants to reason things out with us. What is the point of all the Gospels? 4 different Gospels with different perspectives. It's because it shows us a God who wants to reason things without according to our context, according to our situations in life, according to our way of perceiving things. A God who reasons things out, who uses words, who uses language. And therefore we have the Bible that we read and we reflect so that we can reason our faith out, reason out who God is and what he wants by ourselves. So if God does this and is willing to reason things out and not just assert himself, how much more as Christians we need to learn to do that, to learn to argue, to reason things out, to listen to the reasons of others as well, and to change and adapt and to adjust in order to reach an agreement. So this day, let us ask, as we pray this passage also and reflect, let us ask the grace of real agreement. And when we have difficulties in communicating ourselves, let us not be discouraged, but to learn that Jesus actually came to teach us how um, to communicate. And one of those ways that we need to learn, as Christians especially, is to learn how to argue, to learn how to face our disagreements, our negative feelings sometimes, and to express them in a healthy way so that we can reach that agreement. Uh, so let's be thankful to God for this and ask the greatest communicator, which is God Himself, for this grace to build community and learn in community how to love, how to listen, and to welcome each other in this humble listening and humble arguing and expression of ourselves.